Hello and welcome to episode 607 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. Draft season is upon us. This is not a best ball show. This is not a Dynasty show. This is not a preseason DFS show. This is not a college football DFS show. This is for our home league bros. It is time to crack our knuckles, come up with a plan to beat our friends, our coworkers, our enemies in home leagues. For that today, I am joined by two of the top strategists on our team, Drew Dinkmeyer and Jack Miller. Jack, how's it going today?
It's going well. Excited to talk some home league strategy.
Drew, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Excited to talk about this middle of the first round range, my favorite range in the draft this season.
Yes, on today's show, we're going to discuss strategy for people picking from the 5, 6, 7, or 8 spots in their draft. Hopefully you caught spots 1, 2, 3, and 4, the previous episode to this. I would highly recommend everyone go back and listen to that. We talked about a lot of concepts that will flow through to this episode. And then in the next episode, we'll hit the final 4 spots. Before we get into it here today, 2 things. First, Solver, the Solver Sports, the tools company that we founded, is free on the NFL side for the month of August. You just need an account, and then you can play around with the optimizer, use the bankroll tracker. Be sure to use the link in the show notes for the Solver whenever you sign up so that your accounts sync. Second, I want to give a shout out to our friend JJ Zacharysen's pod, the Late Round Fantasy Football Pod. I honestly don't listen to very many other fantasy football podcast, but if you like ours, I suspect you'll like JJ's pod as well. He's really good at reviewing historical data, conveying how it applies to this season, especially for season-long formats. Episodes are focused and quick. If you're looking to add another pod to your rotation, search Late Round Pod wherever podcasts are found. All right, I got into a bit of a debate with Silva because I said that this range, 5, 6, 7, and 8, is actually my favorite spot to draft in this year. Silva still likes, I think, picking 1.1, 1.2. For me, 5, 6, 7, 8 gives me an opportunity to get something really elite. And I still consider Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Travis Kelce, Steph Diggs, Austin Eckler. I still consider those guys part of that top elite tier. Yes, I think Chase and Jefferson are a little bit of a cut above, but the next 6 guys after them, to me, are in a tier altogether. And then so I'm fine with that. And then in round 2, when it comes back, I can get one of the running backs that I really like, Pollard, Chubb, or Barkley. And maybe Bijan slips there sometimes too. I know there's some Bijan haters out there too. So for that reason, it is indeed my favorite spot to draft. I also feel like I can control the draft better from the middle, you know? And I know there's been debates about this. Some people like picking on the ends. I just think I can control what I do and what I want to do better from the middle. So for me, it's a no-brainer. I think Dink already mentioned that he likes this range as well. Jack, where is your favorite spot to draft from this year?
Yeah, I'm with you guys on the middle, and a lot of it goes to that Tony Pollard and Nick Chubb possibility in the second round, as well as I really like Austin Eckler and Tyreek Hill this year. Eckler is coming off 2 straight top 2 seasons and now has Kellen Moore as offensive coordinator. We have the Chargers for the most plays in the league by a pretty sizable margin. He might lose some target share now that Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are healthy and they have Quentin Johnston, but it's hard to bet against someone who has been a top 2 running back in the past 2 seasons and now has an OC upgrade. And then Hill was dynamite with Tua healthy last year. So I like getting one of those 2 guys, preferably, or Steph Diggs, and then coming back with a Chubb or Pollard in the second round.
It does set up really clean and like the way that I like to build here if you're able to get one of those running backs. We'll talk about the second round here in a second, Drew. But yeah, when you're on the clock here in the first round, a lot of people are going to be faced with Travis Kelce decisions also here. Any thoughts about your first round pick when you have 5, 6, 7, or 8?
Yeah, for me, Travis Kelce's obviously been such an advantage and such a cheat code for fantasy for almost a decade now at this point at the tight end position. He's going to be 34, turning 34 in October. I know he just put up a monster year last year. I know he still has Patrick Mahomes and not a lot of receiver competition on the team to still dominate targets. I just would rather invest in a little bit of a younger player and also know that there's some premium tight end options that are going to come through at different levels of the draft to me in this spot that I think are decent values. Mark Andrews often falls to the middle of round 3. He's another bet that you can make that's similar to Kelce. We've seen the per game upside from Andrews. We haven't seen it consistently play out over a full season, but he's younger, ascending on an offense that's going to throw more. And you'll get other options as well with, Waller, Goddard, Pitts, maybe in the 7th 7th round in the middle there. So I tend to prefer to push Travis Kelce down my list of this top 8 in a little bit closer to the 7-8 range than the 5-6 range.
Yeah, I think thinking about what tight ends you can get later is an interesting way to think about it. In a vacuum, I mean, it's really hard to see Travis Kelce not getting there if you think Patrick Mahomes gets there, because this wide receiver core that they've assembled with the Chiefs is so dusty. I do think it's an important decision, though, Jack. I do want to get your take on taking Kelce here at 5, 6, 7, or 8.
I'm open to Kelce. And in best ball, I have a decent amount of him just for building a portfolio. But in a one-off home league, I would prefer to go with one of the guys I mentioned before, like an Eckler, Tyreek, or Diggs.
Okay. Let's go to round 2. So it sounds like we're going to have a lot of wide receiver starts here. Tyreek, Kupp, Diggs, maybe Eckler gets in here at the running back spot. I think for all three of us, ideally, it's one of Bijan, Pollard, Chubb, or Saquon in round 2. If you're dead set on running back, you could take Derrick Henry here also. Dink, this has been a much debated issue amongst the fantasy community for as long as Derrick Henry has been around, because he is such an outrageous outlier, so reliant on volume, so reliant on touchdowns, yet still gets there every year, despite now getting up there in age. So I think all three of us would probably pull the trigger on Bijan, Pollard, Chubb if it got to us, Barkley in round 2. I'm not sure all of us would pull the trigger on Derrick Henry, though. So what do you think about that one?
Yeah, really torn on that one. And this would a little bit depend on how I started. If I started with Eckler, I'd certainly be more inclined to get into the Jalen Waddle, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, whoever falls from that tier. But if I started with, Kupp or Hill, I might be a little bit more inclined to take the swing on Derrick Henry. You mentioned the age concerns, also offensive line concerns. Brandon Thorne's rankings for the Titans offensive line is one of the worst in the leagues. So there's a lot of reasons for me to want to pass on Derrick Henry here. The good thing about this range for me, and one of the things I like about it, is I feel there's like 18 or 19 guys that are kind of a clear tier drop off. And so often if we're talking about the middle of the second round, you're right in that range. And it's just like, okay, whoever's left is kind of the guy that I'm going to be looking towards. If it's Derrick Henry, that's fine. Ideally, he'd probably be towards the back end of that tier for me, and certainly behind the running backs you mentioned.
Yeah, if you don't get one of those running backs, you're really likely to get one of Waddle or Garrett Wilson or Amon-Ra, right? And that's like awesome to me. So even if I started Kupp or Tyreek and then had to come back with Waddle and Wilson, if you listen to the first episode we did on picks 1, 2, 3, and 4, you understand at least our perspective on how you can fill in a running back room from there. And so I do think wide receiver starts are quite viable here. Again, if you missed on those running backs that we mentioned. Jack, as we get to round 3, it starts to get hairier. It's likely that Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen are gone. Patrick Mahomes might be gone as well. You get into a spot where if you want an elite quarterback, you almost have to take Lamar Jackson here in the middle of round 3. That is pretty early. I am of the opinion that Jackson is part of that tier with those other top 3 quarterbacks, though, and I'm not completely opposed to it depending on your format. Dink already mentioned Mark Andrews could be here if we passed on Travis Kelce, and then we also have some pretty good wide receivers that we like in this range too. Maybe Devontae Smith slips there sometimes, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel. All those guys are really likely to be there for us as well. So this middle of round 3 is a big decision point. You can go with a quarterback in Lamar. You can go with a tight end in Mark Andrews. There's also a lot of really good wide receivers also. So what do you think about, let's start with the quarterback discussion, Jack. What do you think about quarterback here in round 3? Would almost certainly be Lamar, I suspect.
Yeah, if it's Lamar, I usually find myself going in another direction. And then it comes down to Andrews or the wide receivers for me. I think if you have 2 receivers already, that's when you maybe go Andrews, or really just, I'm fine with Andrews regardless. It kind of just comes down to how you want to build your team. And Andrews does offer some flexibility later on, because I know that in the next few rounds, I think we're going to want to go pretty wide receiver heavy. But I do like this tier of receivers a lot too, with Ridley, Keenan Allen, Deebo. But so if Jackson is the only quarterback there, I find myself going a different direction more often than not.
Yeah, I think if you started like Eckler, Garrett Wilson or something like that, I would probably want another wide receiver or Andrews here rather than Lamar. If I started wide receiver, I'm more likely to go Andrews or quarterback. How do you think about the middle of round 3 here?
Yeah, certainly Andrews is a top priority for me and a top target. Dominating the tight end position in your home leagues is really an easy way to kind of ascend. We've seen that Travis Kelce cheat code for a while, and I think we could see that ascension with Mark Andrews into that type of scoring role this year with a more aggressive passing offense. If he doesn't fall, though, then certainly I'm more inclined to take receivers than Lamar. Maybe Lamar if you're in like that 8th pick, but for me, Lamar is more towards the back end of round 3. I really want a gap. I want to be have a comfortable price gap on Lamar between him and Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes. So a little bit dependent on your league, but I'd like a little bit of a price gap there. The receivers here for me, Ridley and Debo are really, really interesting, like prime of their career, strong offenses, big play guys, big spike week potential. They really fit the bulk for me. I know some people are like Evan are really high on DK Metcalf. He goes in this range as well. Another player right in the prime of his career. Keenan I let slip a little bit more unless it's a full PPR type format, just because the age curve is a little running against Keenan here. So I push him a little bit back further from that original group that we were talking about there.
Yeah. And as we move to like round 4 and round 5 here, a lot of the same principles that we talked about on the first episode apply. Even if you started wide receiver, Andrews, something like that, or you don't have any running backs yet, as we get to the middle of round 4 or 5, I mean, Breece Hall is definitely going to be there now. No one wants Breece Hall anymore. Madison is really likely to be there. Joe Mixon could be there. Kenneth Walker could be there. And then we know, obviously, we have access to the tier of Miles Sanders, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, Dameon Pierce types. And so again, just to reiterate the point, I don't want to panic at running back here. There are certainly going to be options. Jack, I know you mentioned the wide receivers in this range in round 4 or 5. When you're in the middle here, maybe Amari Cooper is there, Big Mike Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Drake London, Terry McLaurin. Not like superstar wide receivers, I don't think, but really good bets for volume talent combos. What do you think about the middle kind of rounds 4 or 5 here when you're picking 5, 6, 7, 8?
Yeah, I find myself going receiver here pretty often. There's over the last few years, the idea of kind of a running back dead zone has become pretty popular, where running backs in this area and really rounds 3 to 6 tend to underperform and receivers tend to overperform. I know in the best ball community, there's been some debate about whether that's still true, because ADP has shifted pretty dramatically on best ball sites. I don't think that trend is going to hold to a lot of home leagues. And so I tend to just close my eyes and click receiver in these rounds more often than not.
Yeah, and you'll see that reflected in our home league rankings a little bit. If you go to the top 300s for half PPR, you'll see we do have running backs pushed up higher than we do for other formats. Dink, are you panicking if you get to round 4 or 5 here in the middle if you don't have a running back yet in home leagues?
I think one of the great things about picking in the middle of the draft is what you alluded to when we opened, which is you can just kind of let things fall to you and let the mistakes kind of fall to you in the middle. On the ends, it's just really hard for things to fall directly in that little pocket of picks for your 2 picks to get there. You got kind of 2 chances when you're in the middle. And this middle of the 4th round is one where I am very, very comfortable just letting kind of whatever falls to me here. Sometimes you get some of those running backs like the Joe Mixons who fall into the middle or late 4th, and those are fine for me to take there. Breece Hall would be fine for me to take there. But a lot of times you get those wide receivers who fall as well. Sometimes Keenan Allen, sometimes Deebo Samuel, sometimes Big Mike Williams is available there, or DeAndre Hopkins, those types of names. So I'm pretty comfortable letting the value dictate my positional pick here. And then round 5 is kind of usually the flip, right? Like, so if a running back fell here, usually then round 5, I'm a little bit more focused on the wide receiver side. If a wide receiver fell here, maybe I'm leaning towards a running back if they fall in this range. But really rounds 4 and 5 for me in the middle of the draft, a lot of times you just have something fall in your lap that's really comfortable.
You mentioned at the top, Dink, about the tight end stuff with maybe passing on Kelce with the idea you might be able to get a Mark Andrews. There are going to be some spots where you pass on Kelce there at 5, 6, 7, 8, and Mark Andrews goes before you get there in round 3. At that point, what is your plan at tight end in a home league?
I'm largely looking for round 7 tight end there, and we'll get to that in a little bit here. But that range in round 7, a lot of times you'll get the Goddard in Pitts. Waller's starting to creep up, so Waller's starting to creep up 5th and 6th sometimes. I'm not as much buying that spike, but if Waller in 6 was the viable option, that would be fine for me as well. But generally 6, 7, and ideally the 7th round is where I'm starting to look for a tight end if I've missed in those first 3 rounds.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, if you get into a bind at tight end, I do not think it's the end of the world to show up to week 1 with like Freiermuth, Njoku, you know, Kincaid, Higbee. It's not like I don't feel great about it, but it's not the absolute end of the world. It's not the way I'd like to play a home managed league, but it's not the absolute end of the world. Jack, as we move through to the later parts here, round 7, 8, 9 or so, let's say you don't have a quarterback yet, right? We passed on all of the top 4. Herbert went before we wanted. Trevor Lawrence went before we wanted. How concerned are you about quarterback here? I know we talked a bunch about this in the first episode of this series.
I mean, ideally, if you go into these rounds without a quarterback, it's because you have an advantage over your league mates at other positions, and that's just sort of the trade-off you make. But this is, I'd say, the latter half of the single-digit rounds is when you're going to want to get your quarterback, because you don't want to get into the Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff zone. You want one of those guys like an Anthony Richardson, like a Daniel Jones, who has some rushing ability and some upside to finish at least as a mid-range quarterback 1.
Right. And that's the thing, like the way to win a managed league was be to give yourself access to absolute stars at every position. It's really hard for guys like Kirk Cousins or Aaron Rodgers or Jared Goff to threaten the top guys. Deshaun Watson's been running a ton ever since he got to Cleveland, including in the last preseason game. We talked about that on the show last week. Daniel Jones, we know, is going to run. And then obviously we have Anthony Richardson. For the pocket guys, my favorites would be Tua and Geno, but Tua Tagovailoa and Geno Smith. But, certainly want to have some rushing component there. Ideally, Dink, any final quarterback thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, I was just going to note that this middle of the draft is kind of prime territory for Deshaun Watson in 7 or 8 oftentimes. And then if you miss on Deshaun Watson there, you've missed on Trevor Lawrence so far, then like round 9 becomes kind of the middle of round 9 becomes my target for these like Anthony Richardson, Daniel Jones types that we just alluded to.
Yep. Love it. All right. There it is. Your plan if you have pick 5, 6, 7, or 8. How could you possibly lose after listening to this? It's nearly impossible. Be sure you're following at JackMiller02, at Drew Dinkmeyer, at Adam Levitan on Twitter. Yes, Twitter, not X. 4, Drew. 4, Jack. 4, producer Luke. I'm Adam. Good luck, everybody.